Satoshi Nakamoto's original Bitcoin white paper is only 9 pages long, but almost everyone misreads page 4. Welcome to today's explainer. Today, we're tearing down the document that started it all. Unaltered since its publication back in 2008, it remains the ultimate baseline for technical purity. But we're going to use it to solve a massive modern mystery. Is the reality of modern Bitcoin actually violating its own founding principles? Okay, let's dive into this. For years, people have read this exact quote from page 4. Proof of work is essentially one CPU, one vote. And imagine this perfectly decentralized utopia. A network where every individual just runs a node on their personal laptop, casting an equal vote. But does this sentence actually mean what we all kind of assume it means? Which brings us to the core mystery we're unpacking today. Just look at the modern landscape with this network. We've got massive warehouse-sized server farms that consume the electricity of small countries just to mine blocks. Did Satoshi foresee this intense industrialization? Or does this modern reality of massive server farms completely violate the founding document's original vision? To figure that out, we have to look really closely at what the text actually demands.
So, Section 1, the trust problem.
Back in 2008, internet commerce relied entirely on banks to act as trusted third parties. Satoshi's biggest hurdle in bypassing them was the double spending problem. Think about it for a second. A digital coin is literally just data. So what's stopping me from copying that exact data and spending it with two different merchants at the exact same time? Well, traditionally, a central bank verifies it. But without that bank, a merchant needs computational proof that the entire network agrees their transaction came first.
And this brilliantly illustrates Satoshi's radical shift in privacy. Instead of banks hiding the ledger behind closed doors to protect your identity, this new model totally flips the script. The ledger is entirely public, but your identity, that's kept anonymous behind cryptographic keys. Because to solve double spending without a centralized bank, every single transaction has to be publicly announced, which forces the whole network to agree on a single shared history.
Which leads us to Section 2, the engine, specifically hash-based proof of work.
So how exactly do you get a bunch of globally scattered anonymous computers to agree on anything without a boss telling them what to do? You need a distributed timestamp server. The white paper proposes grouping transactions into blocks and then chaining them together using hash-based proof of work. Basically, the network scans for a highly specific cryptographic value, and finding it requires an exponential amount of computational work. But once that CPU effort is spent, boom, the block is locked in. The golden rule here is simple: the longest chain wins, proving it came from the absolute largest pool of computing power. The text actually lays out the network operation in 6 very clear, sequential steps. First, transactions are broadcast. Then nodes collect them into a block. Third, they literally race to find that difficult proof of work. When a node finally finds it, they broadcast the block to everyone else. The network then checks if it's valid, making sure there's no double spending, and finally, nodes accept it by using its hash to build the next block. They always accept the longest chain as the ultimate, unalterable truth.
Moving on to Section 3, Merkle trees and scaling.
Now, a massive historical assumption was that this public ledger would just eventually become way too heavy for a peer-to-peer network to store. But the white paper actually accounted for that scale using something called a Merkle tree. It's this really elegant cryptographic structure where transactions are paired up and hashed repeatedly until only one single root hash remains. It's kind of like a giant tree where, once a transaction is buried under enough blocks, the detailed data underneath can just be pruned away to reclaim disk space. And it does this without breaking the block's integrity whatsoever.
Get this. Satoshi actually did the math on this for us. A block header with no transactions is only about 80 bytes. Assuming a block is generated every 10 minutes, that scales up to just 4.2 megabytes per year. I mean, to put that into perspective, 4.2 megabytes is roughly the size of a single MP3 song. So the white paper explicitly proved that massive, long-term data storage scaling was actively engineered from the very beginning.
Now for Section 4, anticipating the hardware race. This brings us right back to our core angle. If data storage scaling was mathematically planned out for decades, what about the computing power? Let's go back to that page 4 mystery, the one CPU, one vote line. Did the original text genuinely anticipate that users would eventually ditch standard household computers to build these specialized hyper-fast server farms just to race for blocks?
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the smoking gun found just a few paragraphs down. Satoshi explicitly wrote, "To compensate for increasing hardware speed, the proof of work difficulty is determined by a moving average." Right there, the white paper is explicitly anticipating faster, more powerful hardware. If blocks start generating too fast because the mining machines are getting stronger, the system automatically cranks up the difficulty of the mathematical puzzle.
Let's look a bit closer at how Satoshi describes the incentives here. The difficulty automatically adjusts to hit a specific average of blocks per hour. But even more telling, the white paper directly compares the network to gold miners expending resources to add gold to circulation. The text literally says, in our case, it is CPU time and electricity that is expended. Expending massive amounts of literal electricity wasn't an accident or some sort of system glitch. It was a purposefully designed incentive structure to reward honest nodes with new coins while making the network's security incredibly dense.
Next up, Section 5, the attacker's math. So why is this massive, escalating expenditure of electricity strictly a necessity rather than a flaw? Well, it all comes down to the math. If a fraudulent actor tries to rewrite history, they literally have to outpace the honest nodes. In Section 11, Satoshi uses a Poisson distribution to show how an attacker's chances just absolutely plummet. If you look at the table, at 0 blocks behind, an attacker has a 100% chance. But if they fall just 5 blocks behind, their probability drops to less than 1/10 of 1%. By 10 blocks, it's virtually 0. But remember, this mathematical guarantee only holds up if the honest network aggressively piles on more computing power than the attacker.
So the crucial point is what we find in Section 6, the final verdict. When we synthesize all the technical evidence we've just uncovered, that romanticized utopian reading of page 4 kind of falls apart. One CPU, one vote was actually just a shorthand analogy for computational weight. It was never a strict mandate for standard laptops. The white paper openly expects, mathematically accounts for, and functionally requires an industrialized hardware race. The unstructured simplicity of the network relies entirely on the relentless accumulation of computational power to make altering the past practically impossible.
And that leaves us with a truly fascinating question to take away from this explainer. We've seen today that the founding text designed this self-adjusting engine, literally powered by greed and electricity, to secure an anonymous public ledger. But if the math perfectly holds its ground regardless of how ridiculously fast the hardware becomes, does it ultimately matter to the network who actually owns the machines? It's a question that challenges the very heart of what decentralization means today. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the blueprint of a revolution.